let's add in a method to our context class that's going to automatically clean up after ourselves. So in other words, we want to delete the role that we had created and the schema that goes along with it, so that we don't just keep accumulating roles and schemas every single time that we run a test. So back inside of my context.js file, I'm going to go down to the very bottom, and I'm going to add in a new method called close. So inside of here, we're going to do a couple of different things. We're going to first disconnect from PG. We will then reconnect as our root user. We'll then delete the role and schema that we had created, and then finally we will disconnect again. So why are we doing the first disconnect and reconnect? Well, remember, the entire goal here is to clean up after ourselves. We want to delete that role and the schema we had just created. Whenever we call close, we will probably already be connected as that role that we're trying to delete. As you'd guess, we can't delete a role that we are currently connected as. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. If we try to delete a role that is currently in use, because we are connected to the database as that role, we would end up with an error message. That's why we are doing the initial disconnect and then reconnect as our root user. Okay, let's put in some implementation. So I will do an await pool.close. We'll then do a await pool.connect. And we're going to connect as our root credentials. So the root credentials, we can really just do a copy paste from earlier on up here. So it will be whatever your root user and password are. And you'll notice that we are starting to reuse these credentials quite a bit. So I'm going to cut those out and then make a variable at the very top called default ops or default options. Now we can more easily make use of these connection settings all over the place without having to paste them again and again and again. So I'll then put in default ops right there from where I just pasted it or cut it. And I'll make use of it down inside of our connect statement as well. Like so. Okay, so next up, we'll write out a query that will delete the role in the schema we just created. So we'll do an await pool.query. We will again make use of that format function just to avoid any possibility whatsoever of any kind of SQL injection. So the actual query that we're going to run in this case will be drop schema %i and then cascade. And don't forget, we're going to put in some argument for that %i right there. So the schema that we want to delete is this .role name. And then we'll do another query to delete the role itself. So drop role %i and put in this .role name as well. And then finally, after we've done that cleanup, we can then disconnect altogether. So we'll do an await pool.close, like so. Okay, so that should be it. So let's now go back over to our users test.js file again. So we've now got context, and we want to call that cleanup function after all of our test files inside of here, or all of our tests inside the single file have been executed. So in other words, we need access to this context variable inside of after all. Remember, after all gets executed after all of our tests inside of here have been ran. So to get access to that variable, we're going to define a variable outside just to get the scope put together. That before all, rather than declaring a new variable called context, we're going to assign the context we just built to context. And then finally, inside of after all, we'll return context.close like so. Okay, now let's save this. Let's go back over to pgadmin really quickly. I'm going to refresh my schemas category right here, and you'll notice that I now have 9 schemas because I've ran all my tests about 9 times or so. So if I now run my tests again, I should not see an additional schema created. It will be created, but then it'll be almost instantly deleted after our test file has ran. Let's go and run our tests. Okay, looks like the test passed. So hopefully we did call that close function. So I'll go back over to pgadmin. I'm going to refresh schemas again. And I still only have 9 schemas. Perfect. So that means we are now correctly doing all that cleanup. Now, if you want to, you can manually delete the remaining extra schemas we have inside of here beyond just the public one. So for each of these randomly generated ones, we can right-click them, and then in this case, we're going to do a drop cascade as opposed to just a delete/drop. So we can go through. This is totally optional. I'm just assuming you might want to clean up. I'm going to delete all the rest of these very quickly. And one more. And I'm also going to delete the test one down here that we had created a little bit ago as well. Okay, so now we're back to just one schema. So this is looking pretty good. Okay, so now that we've got this nice context thing put together that will automatically set up this entire kind of connection and all this infrastructure around the database and then clean up after ourselves, we can now start to make use of all this stuff inside of our other two test files. So let's start to do that in the next video.